I like the idea of proper basic beliefs.
Yeah.
You explain it pretty well. Here's a few.
Mm-hmm.
We believe in the historical past, and that we don't believe that the world was created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age, breakfasts in our stomachs we never ate, half-smoked cigars we never smoked, memories of things that never happened. But there doesn't seem to be any way to disprove that the universe began to exist 5 minutes ago with those attributes. It's just that doesn't seem to be any good reason for thinking that, but it does sort of make sense of things. Another one would be maybe that nothing exists outside of this building that we're sitting in right now. We have no immediate access to it. In fact, when I was about 16 years old, I went through a fear of that. I would quickly open up my door to see if the outside world was still existing.
Plug in the Truman Show, that whole show, that whole movie.
Yeah, it was like that. Or the existence of other minds.
Yes. You're all cleverly constructed robots that are indiscernibly different from an actual human being.
Yeah, or that this is a computer game.
So you have appearance, right, which we by an act of conceptual imagination, imagine the appearance being identical in every respect from the reality. And so then I could just substitute reality for substitute and go back and forth, and it would the appearances would be identical.
Exactly. And yet, but we do have these beliefs. Even so, you could even argue me into the ground, right? That this is actually a simulation that you're in, and I wouldn't know how to respond to you. But at the end of the day, I might say, it doesn't seem like that's true. It seems, and I don't have any good reason for it, that reality is as it appears to me, basically, that you do exist, that the outside world exists, that the universe did not begin to exist 5 minutes ago, right? Solipsism is false, the idea that I'm the only one who exists. That just seems false, even though you can come up with a good argument or one that sounds good for it, perhaps. Same thing with God's existence. But here's what I thought once upon a time when I was getting neck deep into William Lane Craig debates back in like 2010 or something, before YouTube really took off. I was just like seeing the way in which debates for God's existence were getting in the way of my relationship with God. And at first I wondered if that was just because I was being threatened by atheistic arguments. And I think that was true partly, but I also think it was true that I was in a way obsessing over arguments for something that just seemed likely to be the case to me. And I thought to myself, wow, maybe someone could start flirting with solipsism, watch a bunch of debates on YouTube. I'm not sure who's
doing that these days.
Who's debating,
or who's into that,
the person who's the solipsist thinks he's debating. But you could imagine getting down into that and that ruining your relationship with everyone in your life.
Yes.
And someone who loves you might shut the laptop lid and be like, you need to stop this.
Where's your joy, brother?
Yeah.
That's
you
what
need to love your wife. You need to... So it's hard to say maybe arguments for God's existence and debates of God's existence are getting in the way with your relationship with God, because our immediate skeptic kicks up and says, oh, you're telling me to leave my brain at the door, are you? You're telling me that at the end of the day, Christianity is intellectually bankrupt, are you? And it's like, no, it's not what I'm saying.
It's a switch that occurs. I think that, so in looking at some of the comments and whatever on both when I went on Cameron's show, right, and your show, I read different comments and there were different YouTube chatter about what I said. And one of the things they said is, well, this guy just sort of leapt into faith, right? He's just another one of these Catholic philosophers who doesn't have reasons to believe. And I mean, it's more complicated than that. There's what I said, there's a whole inferential process where you read literally books and books of arguments, right? And you read the critics. You read, books like The Rationality of Theism that Copan edited, and like you see like 10 different arguments. You read Plantinga's 24, so 24 or so arguments for God's existence, and you look at the skeptics and Dan Dennett's and the Richard Dawkins and the William Rose and the atheists, and you do all this homework, and then you get to the point where you're like, it seems like God exists from the evidence, right? And that's a certain point, but you haven't got to the point where you're really assenting, like I said. Right. So but then as you get to this experiential stuff, you see you experience God is the best way to say it. Right. And you've already allowed for that possibility because you can't eliminate it. Right. Yeah. And so then you have these moments of grace where it's like God speaking, like for Augustine, like Tola Lega, or my friend who said, where's your joy, brother? Right. Or even our own thoughts can do that to ourselves. Right. And then we get to this transition point where we have all those inferential reasons. We could go down the rabbit hole if you want to. Right. But then you have just the common sense thing is like I said on your show the first time, people already believe in God at some level and some degree. Right. And it's just like sort of seeing that it's already in your experience. right? And so I think I would have three responses to that kind of solipsism, 5 minutes ago the world was created kind of stuff. One, you could just say that the seeming that you have, like my colleague Logan Gage talks about, the seemings are like kind of evidence themselves, right? And that you could go that route. You could go the route of more, to me, the sort of more complicated route of the Wittgensteinian route, which is when we use words, right? We use words to ask questions. That's one way we use words. And when we ask questions, we assume there's sort of a range of answers that are reasonable and others that aren't, some that are nonsense and some that are sense. And so that distinction is inherent in the very language that we're using, because language was built, right, for us to be interacting in rational ways, right? And so if we start using language to doubt at this fundamental level, then the very rationality that's already built in language is undermined. So it's like, wow. So that's what he tries to say. Wow. And so then it's like, he says there's just certain propositions like we've never walked on Mars, or England is an island, right? Well, do you arrive at that by inference? No, you just learned that as you grew up, and then it became part of your way of thinking and speaking. So somebody who says, no, England's not an island, would be like, who are you, what? Where are you coming? Like, you're crazy? What? And so the rationality that's built into propositions like that is part of the way we use language, right? And so language is an extension of our reason, right? And there's a distinction between sense and nonsense. So he calls those hinge propositions, right? And so you could try to go that route to respond to is when somebody doubts whether this world was created, right, more than 5 minutes ago, you'd be like, well, what kind of standards of rationality? Where did you get your distinction between sense and nonsense, right? And if they try to like come at it a priori, then they're subject to Wittgenstein's most famous argument, right? Which is that there's no such thing as a completely private language, right? You learned language socially. That's the only way to learn language. It's already social, right? So it reflects your social nature, right? And so that route wouldn't work, right? If you tried to say that, try to say, well, I have these, grammar was sort of just already created in my mind with all this. So like, okay, maybe I could say that's logically possible, but then you're going to have to say all these other words that I'm using, right, to even run this debate, right, have standards in them that are contrary to what this debate is getting me to believe, right? So that's the other route. The other route that I go that I like more, but it's more vague, right, is that there's transcendentals that we have knowledge of: being, truth, goodness, beauty. We already know what those are at some level, right? And those transcend, right, physical experience. They transcend time. They transcend time and space. That's why they're transcendentals in that sense, right? And so we have this ability to know that at that level, right? And so to me, that provides itself a standard for reason, right? And maybe you can combine these three ways in some ways. But I agree, if you're captured by the logical possibility that the appearances could remain the same and the reality just be swapped for a substitute, right? Then it has a compelling question. I think it is a compelling question philosophically to then try to spell out what is the issue, what's the problem, what is evidence, right? What's the nature of rationality? Where's it come from? How does it relate to language? Do we know transcend? So those are further disputes that, to me, the philosopher who encounters those arguments is going to wonder at those further truths before he accepts verdicts.
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.